I lived completely isolated for almost a year and never knew. I had worked construction for the better part of my 20s before the accident. I never had the know-how to get into engineering school like my parents wanted for me, but I preferred to work with my hands anyhow. Jobs came and went, contracts ended, but ultimately I always had a site to work, or a building to put up. When the Whitlam Hawthorne Group offered me a foreman position for the construction project of their new headquarters, I accepted it in a heartbeat. Job security from a company like co.ag with a salary I'd only dreamed of and benefits to match. I thought it would be stupid not to accept. The foundation had barely been poured on the site when the collapse happened. No one knew who was exactly to blame, whether it was the surveyors, the engineers, or just some freak accident. But those of us caught in the rubble only had the parent company to point our fingers at. 3 men dead and 13 injured was apparently a serious enough legal threat that Whitlam Hawthorne opted to offer us each a generous settlement outside of court. You can judge all you want that my silence was bought, but 6 zeros on a check would buy yours too. In addition, they also offered me a systems job. I'd be able to work from home and even a reduced renter's rate at one of their apartment complexes, in a unit that would accommodate the wheelchair I'd be confined to for the rest of my life. Until then, I didn't even know that they owned any residential properties, but the complex looked decent enough on the pamphlet they sent me. After all, I certainly couldn't live alone in my current 4th floor apartment anymore. I moved in near the beginning of February last year. I won't lie, the adjustment to everything at once hit me a lot harder than it should have. Overnight, I had gone from working outside every day to being restricted to a wheelchair I had no intuition for using, and being stuck inside all day long. My hard hat and boots swapped for a work laptop and a filing cabinet. The depression caused by my new situation was only worsened when I got settled in. It was embarrassing how little I owned that would still be practical given my new lifestyle. So it didn't take long for the movers to bring everything over. I was moved in less than a day after I got out of that hospital. The apartment was a 1st floor unit for obvious reasons. The 2nd and 3rd floors each had units with patio balconies that extended an outcrop over my minuscule fenced-in yard. As a result, the already tiny windows in my living room barely got any sunlight during the day. Off to the side of my living room, I had a kitchen with lowered countertops and extended storage space on the lower shelves. My bedroom was spacious, with a wheelchair-accessible closet and a roomy attached bathroom. I wish I could say I was thankful, but the accommodations only reminded me that I'd never live the same life again. Please don't get me wrong, I'm absolutely not one of those guys who sees disability as something that makes someone lesser. My aunt was a wheelchair user when I was growing up, and I had an older brother with special needs. Both of them had my respect for as long as they lived. But both of them had died because in one way or another they depended on something that couldn't be provided for them. In her old age, my aunt fell out of her chair at home one day and didn't have the arm strength to crawl back up or reach the phone. The medics said that her pets had begun to eat her before she even died. And now, after almost 30 years of independence and ability, it seemed as though every one of my prospects was ripped from me, and I was entirely dependent on a company that had caused it. In short, I was very, very bitter. In June of that year, it was as hot as it had ever been in my state. By then, I'd settled into a dull routine. Wake up, do a few arm exercises before I showered, eat breakfast, and then try to get some work done before lunch. What I did could barely qualify as work, but it seemed like the company thought it would be better to have me under NDA and payroll than risk me suing. Once lunch came around, I would check my fridge for groceries and add what I was running low on to my weekly mobile delivery order. It was so much easier to have someone else leave groceries at my front door than to find a way to actually get to a supermarket. I'd found a routine where I honestly never had to leave the apartment. I avoided human interaction those days, so it was easy to stay inside. The only voices I heard for months were my neighbors. From what I could tell, I lived underneath a married couple that never stopped fighting, and in the unit next to me, there was an older woman with at least a couple more cats than our lease allowed. On one particular morning in mid-June, as I got out of the shower and dried my head, I opened my eyes to find that the power in my apartment had suddenly gone out. It was inevitable. Everyone on the block had to have their AC units on blast. I finished drying off, and for the first time since I moved in, rolled over to the curtain sliding door attached to my living room, and went out into my small yard where I knew I'd find the breaker box. The outside air was hot and heavy, and as I watched my toes brush against grass that they couldn't feel, I noticed that without the noise of the AC units running outside, it was very, very quiet. Not even the sound of insects or birds filled the morning air, and for a moment, I let the morning sun rest on my face before it would rise behind the patio, overshadowing my yard. For as short as it lasted, the peace that overwhelmed me was blissful. The silence was interrupted by the sound of a sliding door from above, creaking wood, and the sound of footsteps, followed by the familiar arguing voices I'd grown painfully accustomed to. "If you don't want to fix it, then I will." The wise sky voice grew louder as she moved above me. I never said I wouldn't do it. Give me a damn minute to put my shoes on. Why do you always... I zoned out as their arguing continued above. Even the briefest joy was fleeting, I thought as I opened my own fuse box and flipped the breakers. I heard my AC unit whir to life from outside my fence, muddying the soundscape once more with its mechanical whine. At least it drowned out the arguing above. As I struggled to figure out how to wheel back over the lip on the sliding door, I heard the arguing stop, and the couple's sliding door slide shut and close above me. I managed to get back inside and hoped I wouldn't have to go out again anytime soon. I'm ashamed to admit that was the last time I went outside for months. I'd gone no contact with the rest of my family years ago, and what few friends I had lived out of state. I had no reason to go out anymore, so the summer's heat paired with my depression only forced me inwards. Wake up, shower, eat breakfast, work all day, sleep. Even the arguments upstairs and the occasional meow from the unit next to me became monotonous. I drowned as much of it out as I could. The same voices, the same fights, the same cats misbehaving, day in and day out. In fact, as much as I tried to ignore it, sometimes I couldn't help but listen in. The woman who lived above me, whose name I gathered to be Claire, was seemingly unemployed. She rarely spoke unless it was to accost her husband for wrongdoing or to complain. Her husband, whose name was Jason maybe? He seemed to have some anger issues but seemed more defensive than aggressive. Cold and distant paired with irritable and sensitive. A perfect storm. I never gathered the cat lady's name. Instead, I became very familiar with Greta, Priscilla, and Tom. Every day, the woman would try to quiet Tom for crying too loud for food. And sometime in the afternoon, she would accost Greta and Priscilla for fighting over a nap spot in the sunbeam. Having natural sunlight enter the room sounded like heaven. The voices were my only human connection. It was mid-September when I attempted to clear my throat for my developing allergies that I realized I hadn't heard my own voice in months. I cried myself to sleep that night, feeling more alone than I'd ever been. By October, the isolation became unbearable. I found myself listening to the voices more than I ever wanted to, quieting my apartment as much as possible just to catch them when I could. The same fights, complaints, meowing. They became my friends, my comfort. One night, out of some sense of desperation, or maybe just a form of entertainment for myself, I started responding. It wasn't much at first, just a quiet whisper in response to Claire's complaints. When I heard her hiss, "You never listened to me," I whispered, "I'm listening." When Jason or whatever his name was sighed and muttered, "I can't do this," I chuckled and stuttered out a quiet, "Me neither." I don't know why I kept it up. Maybe just to hear my own voice. Maybe because in a pathetic way, it made me feel like I was connecting with someone. I knew it was stupid and illogical, but it made things feel just a little less empty. It became a kind of game for me. Each night, I sat in the dim light of my apartment, sipping one drink too many, and I listened. I let their words become ours. The fights, the meows, the mild chit-chat. And Claire snapped. "You never take me seriously anymore," I whispered. "Of course I do." When the old woman called out to Tom, scolding him for knocking something over, I grinned and mumbled, "Bad cat." It was more than a game. It was all I had. Then about a week later, I'd started. I noticed it for the first time. Claire had just shouted, "For once in your life, admit that I might be right." I responded instinctively, "Why should I when you're wrong?" Before I could finish my words from above, her husband's voice exclaimed back to her, "But why should I when you're wrong?" I paused. For a minute or so, I sat intently listening. I knew her words had sounded familiar, but had I heard them have the same argument before? brushed it off at first. Of course it sounded familiar. I'd been listening to their fights for months. I'd probably heard them bring up the same talking points a few hundred times. Often enough that subconsciously I probably just knew what he was likely to say. But then, the next day, it happened again. "Is it that hard to get your car's registration done?" "I've been overdue for almost a week," Claire snapped. And I knew for a fact that I had heard that before. Not just something like it, those exact words, in that exact tone, in that exact order. That in itself could have been explainable. Except, for the first time I noticed it had been in August. Her registration hadn't been expired for a week at this point. It had almost been 2 months. I turned off my AC and listened harder. My heart thumped against my ribs. "If it's no big deal, why can't you just go get it done for me?" There, she said that part too, I thought. I swallowed and realized my mouth had gone dry. My palms began a cold sweat as I grappled with the feeling that they'd done this all before, many times. Coincidence, that's all it was. Maybe their fights really were that predictable. I told myself to ignore it, but I couldn't. That night, I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, my ears straining to pick up what was being said above me. I tried to convince myself I was just being paranoid, but something felt wrong. That next day, I kept notes of what little I could hear around me on my computer. In the past, I paid little attention to what was being said and when, but on that day, I was meticulous. I kept every fan off. I didn't run my laundry. I skipped my shower, and I did everything in my power to keep my home as quiet as possible, to maintain the ability to transcribe every word being said. From the old woman next to me, 8:15 a.m. "Oh, Tom, be quiet. I fed you already." From upstairs, 8:17 a.m. Claire on the phone. "Yes, he left for work. No, it'll just be me here until he comes home for lunch." 12:32, upstairs again. "Jason, I told you not to slam the front door when you come in. You scare the hell out of me every time." All throughout the day, anything that I could struggle to make out, I made note of. The next morning, I awoke earlier than usual. I had my notes and I had some time, so I showered and made my way to the middle of the apartment to listen once again. I sat eagerly waiting, checking my watch and waiting for signs of life. Then, from the apartment adjacent to mine, at exactly 8:15 in the morning, the woman began to speak. "Oh, Tom, be quiet. I fed you already." 8:17. "Yes, he left for work. No, it'll just be me here until he comes home for lunch." And more, all morning long. I listened in awestruck silence at my entire day's transcription, being reenacted word for word, minute by minute. By the time 12:32 rolled around and Claire complained about the door slamming, I was sickened to realize that on neither day nor any other had I ever actually heard the door slam shut. As if the same script was being read over and over, just muffled enough and just faint to keep me from noticing. I needed air, so I did something I hadn't done in months. I left my apartment. I struggled to wheel out into the complex's courtyard, squinting against the sunlight. The fresh air strange but refreshing against my skin. The apartment building wrapped around in a neat, uniform U-shape, with a mirroring building just across the narrow parking lot. The second and third floor balconies of each building were stacked like dull concrete shelves above my head. I looked up at the couple's unit just above mine. The small windows all had their blinds wide open, but I couldn't make out movement inside. I wheeled around to look at the unit next to mine, where the old woman lived. Blinds open, but the same. No movement inside. I realized quickly that every unit in my building and the building across the way was the same. Blinds open, no signs of life. I sat there for nearly an hour watching. Not a single shadow moved behind the windows. No doors opened. No one entered or left the building. The silence pressed against me as I realized that not only were there no people visible to me, there was no movement at all. No birds, no passing cars, no distant voices from other tenants. Just the wind and the faint mechanical hum of the AC units. Living in isolation will do strange things to your mind. It'll make you keep track of things that societal norms would normally remind you of, but it also makes you ignore glaring truths right under your nose. It wasn't until I sat there, utterly confused, that I suddenly realized that I had never seen my neighbors. Not once. Not leaving their doors, not in the parking lot, not on their balconies, despite hearing their voices out there almost every night. I hadn't even spoken to anyone in person when I moved in. I'd filled out all my paperwork online, and I had been driven here by a company vehicle when the movers said they brought everything over. A sick feeling crept into my stomach. I had lived here for 8 months. 8 months of hearing these same people argue, of hearing the woman behind me talk to her cats, and I had never once seen another human being in the flesh. The implication had barely begun to set in when, almost in reaction to my realization, the blinds in the apartment next to mine suddenly closed shut. They were followed only a few seconds later by those belonging to the unit upstairs, and in almost a cascade, all the open blinds for every unit in the building were closed. I moved faster than I ever had in my chair. I wheeled quickly out of the little courtyard and into the parking lot street. Surely there had to be a leasing office somewhere nearby. As I reached the lot, I looked both ways and saw only rows and rows of identical buildings, the blinds on each slowly closing, the movement rippling away from me for what seemed like miles of units. I had never realized the scale of the complex. As I hustled to find any building that stuck out, I noted that I still saw absolutely nobody. Empty cars parked in lots, bicycles leaning against fences, varying patio furniture, and even children's toys left on sidewalks as though they'd be returned too shortly. All signs of life, but without any life at all to be seen. After about 20 minutes of searching for any indication of an office, I returned to my home. My arms were exhausted from moving more than I had in a long time, and I knew I couldn't keep searching forever. I made it back to my unit not long after. With the surrounding windows blocked from view by intrusive blinds, my home felt bleak, solitary among the rest of them. It didn't help that I knew that somehow I really was the only one here. I made it back inside and closed the front door behind me. Not 1 second later, as I turned to go to my room, a chime startled me, and I realized that my doorbell had been rung. I immediately turned back to reopen the door, but outside there was no one to be seen. Just my weekly grocery delivery sitting neatly on my doormat, and possibly waiting where it hadn't been only 5 seconds prior. The following days were a blur. Had there actually been anyone outside to look at my apartment, they would have seen me wildly going from window to window, peering through blinds like a tweaker waiting on a package. For about a week, all of the arguing, the meowing, and the idle conversation that had repeatedly permeated my walls went absolutely silent. Whatever was going on, it caught wind of my curiosity and stopped, as though to gather itself and prepare. And prepare it must have. Since when the sounds of human voices and interactions reappeared a week later, they'd changed. New arguments, new discussions, and even a new cat supposedly added to the bunch. The second day that the voices came back, I noticed that they were different from the day before. The conversations were new the next day as well, and the day after that. For 7 days, I almost allowed myself to believe that maybe I'd been imagining things. I even began to hear the occasional car outside, slowly creeping past. Maybe something I somehow hadn't noticed before. On the 8th day of the return of the noises, however, my heart sank. Repeated phrases, returning arguments, and interactions that I'd already hastily taken note of 1 week prior. The next day followed suit. They'd learned, but only a little bit. Whatever loop was being played for me was now a whole week's worth of audio, not just a day's worth. Even the passing cars returned exactly at the times I'd remarked the week prior. But now that I was looking for them, I could tell that they were driverless. 2 weeks had passed since I left my apartment, and a thought occurred to me. What would happen if I tried to interrupt the routine? I checked my notes from the prior 2 weeks and began to prepare a plan. The next day, the old woman would chastise her cats for ganging up on the new kitten at exactly 9:13 in 3 seconds. However, I would knock on her door at 9:13, hopefully forcing whatever charade was about to be performed for me to have to adjust. The next morning, I prepared myself. I shaved for the first time in weeks, and I made sure I looked as presentable as possible. I couldn't give them any reason or excuse not to open the door for me. I waited in front of the door for about 2 minutes, my eyes locked into my wristwatch and my ears as alert as they'd ever been. The very second my little Casio turned 9:13, I knocked as loudly as I could without sounding aggressive and was sure to stop knocking in less than the 3 seconds it would take her to start speaking. I waited with bated breath, far longer than I think I should have. 3 seconds felt like a minute, and by the time an actual minute rolled around, hours had gone by in my mind. I was satisfied enough with my ability to interrupt the cycle, and as I turned my chair to return back home, something spoke to me from behind the door. "Who is it?" 3 words. 3 new words, spoken undeniably in response to me. But whatever was speaking to me was not an old woman. I don't know if I'd even call it a human. The words felt disjointed, as though stitched together from other phrases and distorted in a rushed attempt to sound coherent. I barely had time to collect my thoughts before the voice called out again. The words the same, but the cadence and tone shifted, attempting to emulate normal human speech. It sounded more natural, but it was still undeniably inhuman. "Who is it?" I'm your neighbor from next door." "Who is it?" The voice called once more as, to my horror, the door cracked open. I braced myself to see something horrible waiting for me inside. Some mockery of a human being waiting to lunge at me from the darkness. But darkness, inky black and concealing, was all that greeted me from behind the door. The door opened in full, and as what little sunlight that could pour inside. There was absolutely nobody inside. No movement, no sign of life, save for a voice that called out from the doorway, now in perfect form. "Who is it?" I peered my head inside the doorway, and as I did, I felt myself through a threshold. Icy and cold. Worse was the feeling of loneliness that seemed to inject itself into my veins. In all of my months being alone, I had never felt it quite so intensely as when I crossed through that door. As I entered the living room, only one thing about the otherwise unremarkable home stood out. A wheelchair, fallen over onto its side, lay in the middle of the floor. Couldn't see anything around it, but it was surrounded by sounds of slow, methodical chewing and the occasional tearing of flesh partnered with a hungry meow. I left immediately. After that day, the pre-written schedules changed more often and far more sporadically. Sometimes I would go days without hearing anything. Sometimes entirely new arguments would appear in days I thought I documented, and occasionally the cars that would pass would make a turn they hadn't before. Every action was hollow, though, and every voice was attached to nobody real. I knew that much for certain. I started to review my options. I hadn't seen another human being for the better part of a year by now, and I doubted that were to change unless I somehow got out of this complex. But where would I go? There was no one to come and pick me up. I hadn't opened my work laptop in weeks, and I knew no one in whatever city I was in. Did I even know where I was at? I vaguely remembered the offer after the accident and the company men coming to get me from the hospital, and my mind struggled to remember the actual order of events that led me to living there. The more I puzzled it over, the less it made sense. As far as I could piece together, I had been in the accident, and some suits had visited me in the hospital when I woke up. They explained vaguely what happened and that the company wanted to avoid legal troubles, so they passed me over the check and the new job offer, as well as the pamphlet for the apartment. I remember signing my leasing information online from the hospital, and then I remember being brought here, directly from there. Had it been that immediate? Had I been in such a daze that I didn't recognize the strangeness of the situation? My thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. Not a doorbell, a knock. 3 solid knocks, echoing through my apartment. A chill ran as far down my spine as I still had feeling, and I slowly began to wheel myself towards the front door. I stopped in the kitchen to grab a knife on my way. "Who's there?" I asked, my voice reeking with panic. There was no answer for a moment, then softly and meticulously from the other side, I heard my own voice, broken and stitched together, call back to me. I'm your neighbor from next door." I flung the door open, brandishing the large steak knife out into the open air. I couldn't see anyone in front of me, but I knew that something was there. I sat, wildly swinging the knife in front of me, and the voice called again from right in front of my face. "I'm your neighbor from next door." There was a shimmer in the air, a glint of sunlight, a distortion outlining a shape that was unambiguously humanoid. And it was entering the threshold of the door, slowly creeping toward me. This was my only chance. With all the strength I could muster, I hurled the knife towards the no one in my entryway. And as it passed through the glimmering shape, I knew so could I. I pushed myself towards the no one, and as I entered its form, A cold I'd only ever felt once before shot through my veins. The icy sting sought to freeze me in place, and the empty solitude that pressed in around me should have taken all the steam out of me. But I didn't let it. I could feel it now. It was real. It could be escaped. I made my way through the form, and as I looked back, it turned towards me, its non-existent, unbeing making haste to attempt to swallow me up once more. I was faster than it, though, and as I turned the corner of the courtyard into the street, I forced myself to ignore the burning of my arms and kept pushing myself onward. As I rolled as fast as I could, I looked at the identical buildings surrounding me. Through every blind, through every cracked door, there was nothing and no one watching me. I felt eyes, hungry and jealous, piercing me from all sides. Nobody was trying to keep me here, but I wouldn't give it the satisfaction. I caught glimpses from my peripheral vision of glimmering nothings clambering out of doors and emerging from parked cars. I felt chills run through my body once more as I must have passed through a group of them, their arms outstretched attempting to grab me. Whatever they were or weren't, I don't think they could touch me, but I could feel them. More and more of them piled out of the front doors, sprinting towards me. The air around me began to ripple as they amassed in numbers. It reminded me of waves of heat emanating from the roofs of cars under the summer sun. No one's finger clawed at me as I pushed through thousands of them. Voices crackled, warped, stitched together nonsense, surrounding me with their fractured cries. After what felt like eternity, through the shimmering crowd that wasn't there, I saw what I'd been longing for, the end. I had reached the edge of the complex. It wasn't anything special as far as I could tell. No barrier or wall that would hinder my escape. I pushed myself harder and faster than my exhausted arms should have allowed, but every icy claw that passed through my blood renewed my endurance. The moment I crossed the threshold, the screams collapsed into silence. The air behind me felt full. No empty, frozen fingers, no warped voices, no nothing. I didn't dare look back, though. I looked out ahead of me and had never been more relieved to see a shitty dollar general in my life. I cried sweet tears of joy when I laid eyes on a struggling jogger, fat, sweaty human. I rolled over the crosswalk and came to rest at the bus stop across the street. I finally let my aching arms rest and they collapsed to my sides. I sat for a moment, tears rolling down my cheeks and reeking of sweat and body odor. I must have looked insane even to the scraggly homeless man that sat on the bench, but I didn't care. He would never know it, but I loved him simply for being there. I eventually found my strength and warily turned my wheelchair towards the complex that had entrapped me for a year of my life. I don't think I'll ever be able to explain what I saw. Before me lay an unassuming dirt lot, not larger than a football field. Unattended construction equipment lay dormant, and a porta-potty lay toppled and vandalized in the back corner. Surrounding the perimeter of the lot was a chain-link fence. A land development sign stood at the perimeter, its red letters crisp and clean as if freshly posted. Beneath an artist's rendering of a sleek new building, the words, "Coming soon, Whitlam Hawthorne Research Complex." I am the sole remaining employee of an abandoned water park. The summer I got a job here, I was 17 and it was a good year. Ellen Ditzworth used to work the hot dog stand and we'd sneak cigarettes under the beams of the Dragon Slayer ride, cringing and giggling as the cars went overhead, dripping water all over us, wet hands and damp cigarettes. But it was near her station and I think she found it funny to get splashed. It was out of the way too. It was always quiet and cool down there, even in the summer heat. If any of the ride goers smelled our cigarette smoke as they hurtled overhead, they didn't say anything. One time, when we fumbled around and flirted, I kissed her fingers and they smelled like an ashtray. I still think about it to this day. I was 22 when they offered me the winter job. Ellen was long gone by then. No more bright red short shorts and poorly shaven legs that she'd invite me to stroke under the pretense of showing just how bad she was with a razor. There were other girls, but by the time the final summer rolled around, I'd felt long uncomfortable hanging out with new hires. Sometimes I'd stand there listening to them talk, and I'd feel lonelier than I had when I was by myself. I was thinking about my future around this time when the manager told me he had an opportunity for me to make good cash. They needed someone to stick around and keep the place ticking, while everyone went back to the real world. The usual guy had walked, and they needed someone bad. The last day before the park shut for winter was always Halloween, and that was only because it had a fireworks show. After that, it turned into a ghost town, and I'd be on my own. I'd get a trailer to sleep in, and I could use my own car to get to the closest shop. The park would pay for some of my gas. Not all of it, but enough to help out. The only real problem was I'd be alone. Not that the place was a desert island. There were 2 towns within easy driving distance, and I could have friends so long as we didn't mess with the rides. But other than that, I'd be the only staff member on hand for the entire 4 months. Security guard and janitor rolled into one. I agreed, but I told them when the park reopened in March, I'd be done. I figured it was time to move on, get a degree like some of my friends have, or maybe my dad could help me out with a job somewhere. The world was wide open to me, and I figured I'd sit on my ass all winter, make a shit ton of overtime, and then go on to some new adventure where I'd meet another Ellen Ditsworth or 2. Yesterday, I turned 38, and I'm still in the park. The government signs my checks now. Couldn't tell you when that happened exactly. Probably after the media got wind of Denise Surrey, who broke in with her friends and never left. Lots of kids have gone missing here over the years, but she was the one who went mainstream. Her parents were doctors, and she had blue eyes, so she got just enough attention to get the news cameras out. When the fuss died and the media moved on to its next story, some government guys came and installed 8-foot steel palisade fences. Gave me the keys to the only gate, and scarpered real quick. It gave me a funny feeling seeing 4 men in suits, barrel-chested with pistols on their hips, climb into an unmarked vehicle and accelerate out of the parking lot so fast the back of the car fishtailed. One of them looked over his shoulder at the park, and he was so scared it was like he was looking at a mushroom cloud. I was the one who found Denise. She'd gone crawling headfirst down the Astro Missile water slide. One of those up and down kinds of slides that have you bouncing along on a paddy dinghy. Rides like that are usually open top, but this had long sections in a closed tunnel with LED lights to look like stars. The thing is, depending on your weight, some people would catch air and hit the top of those tunnels going 20 miles per hour, maybe more. We used to take turns going in there to pull out any teeth that gotten stuck on the roof. 15 years later, that tunnel mouth looked like something out of a nightmare. Fairy moss covering the opening. Darkness inside heavier than the night around it. Bone dry and with no obvious way to safety. Denise died of thirst. I think she was in there for 6 days, crawling around in the pitch black, looking for an exit that should never have been more than 100 feet away. There were signs something was wrong with this place, back when it was still open. I just didn't register them. There were the injuries and accidents that are common in every water park, but we had a couple hundred serious ones every year. Usually 1 a day. Tried to mitigate it with safety measures, but half the time they didn't work. Radios would bug out when you try sending a warning. Repair guys would get lost, calling up angry, saying the road just kept going right forever and they'd had enough of this shit. Out of order signs would go missing. Sometimes kid would insist some staff member had waved them through on a closed attraction. They'd be so adamant I started to believe them. I think the manager did too. He made it policy to have name tags on us at all times, and the kid said whoever gave them the go-ahead didn't have one on, he'd tell us all to forget it. Like, it wasn't even worth trying to figure out who needed a disciplinary. I had it happen once where I radioed to the guy at the top of one slide and told him to stop any kids coming down. The last one had come out bleeding and looking unresponsive, and I wanted to check on him. I remember pulling him out of the water and looking at this boy, all slack and pale as a sheet of paper with blue lips. So cold, it hurt just to hold him, and I wondered if I was holding someone dead when, out of nowhere, another kid slammed into me so hard I went under. It scared me shitless, because for a second or two, it was like I couldn't see the surface of the pool. Almost like there wasn't one. Just blue, forever and ever. Before I could start to panic, my feet found the floor, and I surfaced only to see the kid I'd been holding seconds ago, standing there looking worried. He was the picture of good health. Asked if I was okay. Said sorry for hitting me when he came out the slide, but really it was my own dumbass fault for standing there in the first place. The guy at the top swore on his life he'd never gotten any radio message from me. I put it all down to the head injury, which was bad enough the owner made someone drive me to the emergency room. Looking back, I'm pretty sure it was the park having its fun with me. Could have been worse. You could say it likes to play tricks, but those tricks are mean as hell, and over the years, they've only gotten worse. Despite all I've told you so far, the first winter alone wasn't as bad as you might think. Creepy as hell walking around all those rides that were usually so busy and full of life. Tarpaulins pulled across all those pools, big and small, moving with gentle susurrations in the icy winds. It wasn't great in the day, overcast and dreary, the air seemingly blue, but at night it was even worse. I made those rounds quickly, stopping sometimes to summon what little bravery I had to shine a light in the pitch black toilets or to check one of the changing stalls dotted around the place. Things went missing a lot, moved around. Once, one of the rides came to life at 3 a.m., and I woke to the sound of tinny music echoing throughout the park. But winter came and went without any real incident. On the first day the park reopened, I went to see the manager and slipped in some water. I broke my left arm and did a number on my back. Owner was so scared of being sued, he threw money at me. He told me he'd cover the medical bills, sit me up in my trailer, and pay me to do nothing. Nothing. What was I going to do? I'd arranged to start another job on a construction site in a few weeks, and there was no hope of me doing that kind of work with my injuries. I needed money and had no other way of making it. I agreed to stick around until I felt better, but unfortunately, I never felt better. Winter soon rolled around again, and the same deal as last time was back on the table. He needed someone on site, and I needed money. I took it, thinking another few months in the park wasn't so bad. I was wrong. The second time around was a lot worse. Part of it was me, 23 years old and with a bad back, drinking most nights and struggling with the prescription painkillers. I spent most days haunted by the strange feeling that my life's honeymoon phase was over. Hardly any friends accepted my invite to come spend a couple of weeks, and those that did weren't around long. Couldn't tell you if that was just us growing apart as friends often do, or the park's strange influence. Dave came around with his girlfriend for a couple of nights. She grouched the whole time. I ended up in a tent while they took the trailer. Didn't love that arrangement, but whatever. She didn't like the park either. Kept saying she felt like something was watching her. Trip was cut short when we found her screaming one morning. She was pointing at one of the slides, saying something had come out of it and was in the pool swimming around. But when we looked, we didn't see anything. She did have a hell of a bite on her ankle though. Funny shape to it. Dave looked at it and got really freaked out. They left in a hurry. Another car's tire screeching as it hauled ass out of here at top speeds. Never did figure out what happened, but if she didn't like the park, well, I guess it didn't like her either. Not that I was much safer. I found myself getting cut up like crazy, doing basic odd jobs. Things broke all the time, even if they'd been fine for years and years. And then one night, I came into my trailer to find a drowned possum on the little kitchen table. Poor thing was soaked in chlorine water that dripped onto the floor in a puddle. No marks going to it or from it. Like, it just happened there out of thin air. It stank like hell though. It had clearly been dead for days and days. I gingerly dropped it into a garbage bag using a pair of tongs and threw the lot in the dumpster. But I still couldn't spend more than a few seconds in the trailer without gagging, so I slept in the tent instead. I pitched it as close as I could without picking up that smell, but I had a bad feeling the whole time I set it up, like I was being watched. By the time I was climbing inside, it was midnight and I was desperate to get to sleep and see the cold night turn to day. Barely an hour later, I had to climb back out of the tent because the trailer door was banging in the wind. Okay, I told myself as I shuffled over in my tidy whities, arms wrapped around my chest for warmth. That's my own stupid fault for leaving it open. I closed it in a hurry and went back to the tent, but stopped dead in my tracks when I saw the zipper was pulled shut. I hadn't left it like that. I didn't know what to do. My brain went in two directions at the same time. One said I was mistaken. I had closed the tent and just forgotten it. The other said something, or someone had crawled inside and was waiting for me. It set the whole thing up as a trap, and the best thing to do was to get in my car and drive until the sun rose. But I was already half cut and knew I shouldn't be driving. The skeptical half of my brain made an appealing case. The world isn't a nightmare, it said. It can look like one sometimes, but it isn't real. If you hear a bump in the night, you go looking and find it was all nothing. And you take a deep breath, laugh at yourself for getting scared, and move on. Still, it took everything I had just to take a few steps toward that tent. And I shone my light at it, hoping to see some sign of something in there. By the time my hand was on the zipper, I was shaking like a leaf and rethinking my ethical code of not driving drunk. But when emotions get that high, it's like you run on autopilot. Must be a survival thing. I opened the flap without really telling myself to, that I was looking inside my tent, and there was nothing there. I crawled inside as quick as I could, pulled the zipper back the other way, and tried to go to sleep. I settled down for maybe another 30 minutes when something's hand pressed against the tent wall. And that was when I started screaming. The way it came at me, palm open, fingers spread, tent fabric stretching to near breaking point. Long fingers that tapered to a point, almost razor sharp, and a palm not much larger than a golf ball, even if the fingers spanned a dinner plate. In the nightmare reality of the moment, I saw it the way I might see a spider, equal parts disgust and terror. I had to get away, and I backed up so fast I wound up rolling the whole tent like a hamster ball. Lost the zipper in the panic. Didn't find it again until the last scream finally left my lips, and I was forced to catch my breath in the silence of an empty night, accepting that whatever was out there was either laughing its ass off at me or waiting patiently. Either way, I was at its mercy. The only thing I could do was collect myself and leave the damn tent. When I finally climbed free, there was nobody waiting for me. Only a couple of wet footprints going to the nearest pool. I considered pulling the tarpaulin back and looking, but I was already scared shitless and had no courage remaining. Instead, I ran into the trailer, slammed the door shut, barricaded it with every last piece of furniture that wasn't bolted to the floor, and fell asleep with the smell of rotten meat filling my lungs. Come morning, I was thankful for the sunlight and the feeling that last night's events were just a dream. After that, I locked my trailer door every night, and I never slept in that tent again. No more possums, but it isn't uncommon for me to find scratches and dents in my door each morning. Nothing serious, but it looks to me like the probing of a curious animal. A couple of days later, something locked me in the boys' bathroom near the east end of the park. I'd only gone in because one of the faucets was running. I just turned it off when the door slammed shut, and I couldn't get it open again. I had to kick the lock out, which isn't an easy thing to do. First kick, I nearly broke my ankle. The second time hurt just as bad, and I had to take a breather to cope with the pain. I found myself pacing and occasionally stopping to listen for any sign of someone waiting for me outside. Somebody I could shout at, blame it all on. Anything to keep the anger churning and not let it turn to fear. It was a full hour before I got panicked enough to give it my all and finally broke the lock. Burst into the cold air, all red-faced and flustered, and found the park silent as a graveyard. Just those tarpaulins waving gently in the breeze. I learned some important lessons that winter. If you feel washed or feel like you're walking into a situation someone plans, it's because you are. When the park reopened, I was out of there without a moment's hesitation. I finally got that job on a construction site, and it lasted all of 3 weeks before I hurt my back again. I spent the rest of summer laid up on my dad's sofa, drinking and watching daytime TV. I got a call from the manager around August, and he told me it had been a bad summer. Not only had the cops been sniffing around like crazy because some poor kid went missing in the area, but they'd had twice as many injuries as before. He said he just spent the day in court hearing testimony from the parents of some kid who'd never walk or feed himself again after he hit his head on one of the rides. He sounded pretty beat up about it. He wasn't the best boss, but it wasn't like we worked for Mr. Burns either. The poor guy was out of his depth. Anyway, part of the court settlement was he had to have staff members on site 24/7. I'd done it twice before, and he was desperately in need of someone who knew the job. I nearly said no, but he told me it was me or some 17-year-old lifeguard who'd shown interest in the job, and I didn't like the thought of that. God help me, I accepted, and when I went back that third time, I took a gun. And this time, I trusted my instincts. If I walked past a changing stall and heard the shower running, I'd let it run. An hour later, it'd be turned off again. If I saw someone had left the lights on in the staff room, I'd let them stay on until morning when I could deal with it in the comfort of daylight. Flushing toilets, wet footprints, open doors. I learned to stop sweating the little things, and 9 times out of 10, they went away on their own. Pretty soon, I found myself laughing at them. A big fat wallet sitting in the middle of a solitary lounger that had been dragged into the moonlight. A phone ringing from somewhere in the depths of a maintenance hatch. Those kinds of crude tricks weren't going to work on me, I decided. I thought I had it all figured out, and there was nothing left for that place to show me. And then the park ate a drifter. Or something did anyway. Did it right in front of me too. I'd found the guy sleeping in one of the brick and mortar bathrooms. We have to keep those things warm enough to stop the pipes from bursting, so I guess they make decent enough shelter. He was an agitated old fuck. Called me all sorts as I told him to clear off. He didn't make for the main exit though. It wasn't like he parked a car in the lot, was it? Instead, he just made a beeline for the nearby hills. No fences in that part of the park back then, only open fields moving into woodland. His plan was just to walk into the wilderness in the middle of winter, and I wondered if I was actually marching some guy to a cold death. I remember looking at his shoes and seeing the backs of his heels exposed, and I realized I couldn't let him do that. Snow was due to fall that night, and I knew it was going to get real bad out there. "Hey," I cried out while slowing to a stop. "Look, man, it's late, I'm sure." My words died out. I didn't really know what to say when he turned to face me. He was angry and tired, and I knew he wasn't ever really going to be thankful for some randomer's charity, but that didn't mean I shouldn't try. For a moment, the only sound was the tarpaulin of the large pool to our right. I was just about to cough up some more words when his feet went sideways, his body rotated around his center of mass, and the next part of him, to touch solid ground, wasn't his head. It made a noise that makes my teeth ache just to think about. A percussive, almost musical note that really shouldn't be made by a human skull. The blood that sprayed across the tiles reminded me of when I go paintballing with my friends. I remember looking down at it and noticing a couple of loose teeth. Strange feeling. For a few seconds, everything turned to a kind of white noise as ancient instincts rooted me to the spot with fear. Paralyzed me. A million thoughts went through my head. The guy was dead. Something had taken him. The blood used to be inside of him. I have blood inside of me. Does my blood look like that? These thoughts were like the sparks that fly off a loose electrical wire, but I was stuck, mired in them until the whistling in my ears faded and I heard something being dragged across the floor. The guy hadn't even gone that far. He'd flown about 8 feet and landed just on the edge of the pool. His legs were in the water, hidden behind the tarpaulin, and only his top half was on dry land. His head was a ruin of blood and matted hair, but he still managed to look at me for just a moment before he slid the rest of the way below the water with a quiet splunk. The realization he was alive kicked my ass into gear, and I ran over to the circuit box and hit the button that pulls back the pool cover. The machine ran loud as it drew the heavy blue sheet back across the water. It felt like eternity waiting for it. When it was finally over, I could look down to the water and see clearly there was nobody there. Not even a cloud of blood polluting the pool. Nothing. I felt like I was going insane, and I even looked over and double-checked that the guy's plastic bag was still where he dropped it, just so I could be sure I hadn't made the entire thing up. I really didn't know what to do. The only thing in that water was a couple of leaves that had made it in there over the fall, but that was it. And then I saw it. I can't explain it easily. It was a sudden overlap of realities, a bit like the hollow cube illusion, where it can be two things at once. Without ever taking my eyes off it, that pool became every deep body of water I'd ever seen. All of them, all at once. It was every calm and glassy ocean surface with rays of diffused light leading into unseen depths. Every lake with murky kelp fingers reaching up out of the dark, and every flooded basement with black and brackish water. I could smell the stagnant water, could feel the breeze you get standing on the coast, and taste the salt. All of it at once. And something moved in those infinite waters, and it was big. It was like the first time I saw the Grand Canyon, big. Like when you get on a plane and see the ground pull away so quickly it loses perspective. Whatever was down there was coming right at me, and I'm not ashamed to say I pissed my pants. An ocean full of stars was down there, and the thing swimming towards me had a body that obscured entire nebulae. I felt vertigo come over me, and I backed away, and I slipped in the blood, and then I woke up a few hours later and started screaming. I had to clean up in the morning, and I had to pull the tarpaulin back across. The machine only goes one way, so I had to do it with a pool stick, and it made me feel sick just to go near it. Every time I got close, I started to feel dizzy again. When I finally mustered the courage to look, there was the same old pool it always been, but I'd never shake the feeling I had when I was looking down in it and saw teeth like tectonic plates. When summer rolled back around, I saw a bunch of kids in that pool and had to go be sick in a bush. The thought of them sharing space with that thing. Man. After that, I felt like I belonged to the park, weird as it sounds. The manager didn't have to fight with me to get me to stick around for a 4th month, or a 5th or 6th. The rest of the world didn't feel so real to me anymore. Sitting and eating dinner with my father while he lectured me on my prospects. Getting a beer with an old friend who was passing through. I felt like I'd gone into fucking space and seen the world was flat, and now I had just to come back on the earth and pretend like I cared about whether my soda was diet or not. Not long after that, the park had its last ever summer. It had gone too far by that point. The government was looking to close it all down on account of the accidents, and the manager was down at the station every other day for questioning. 4 kids went missing that year alone. I found one of them folded up inside a pool filter, but didn't report it on account of not wanting the attention. The rest I don't know about. I was told I'd be paid another month or so after closure until a demolition crew came in, but no one ever arrived. Just me, this place, and a back that's getting worse with each new winter. I don't patrol at night anymore. Little by little, the park has become something unfamiliar to me. Grass growing up between old tiles, pool water the color of cut grass, and engine oil. Even in the day, you can see things moving around down here, and the smell of chlorine no longer fills the air. Now it's the heavy stench of rotten algae and dead water, and sometimes the tang of the salty ocean that I've learned to avoid like the plague. Makes me see stars in the corner of my vision, and I don't like it. My dreams are bad enough. Drowning in the dark, something huge bearing down on me. I've woken up more than a few times and vomited up salt water. I can't bring myself to think about what any of it means because I just don't want to know. The last time I went in the park after dark, I had a close call. Worst of my life. I've been thinking about leaving ever since, but I worry there's not much else out there for me at this stage. That, and I kind of feel guilty I didn't save all those kids with the cameras. Urban explorers, they call themselves. And I say kids, but really they were college students who recorded videos for something called TikTok. Anyway, they came prepared. They scouted the park, even scouting me, working out my routine and where my trailer is so they could avoid my general line of sight. I had no clue they'd watch me for a whole day. Once they figured I was passed out or asleep, they drove their van as close to the fence as they could, climbed to the top, and hopped on over. For about an hour, they got what they wanted. I've watched the footage 100 times. Broken down toilets covered in graffiti, smashed windows and broken glass covering the floor. Old pools full of ancient water covered in thick, brackish scum. You can hear the glee in their voices. That kind of urban decay was their bread and butter, and they were good at it too. They stayed quiet, didn't shout or break anything. They just filmed. It wasn't until they decided to try rowing out to the castle that things took a turn. I came too late. What got me out of bed was a scream. Maybe a few of them. It was blurry, and I came to around 3 a.m. and was still a little tipsy, my head foaming at the edges with a half-remembered dream of a hollow world filled with water. As soon as I saw the van, I realized someone had gotten inside the park, and I hadn't just been dreaming the sounds of splashing water and panicked. But by the time I went in there myself, the place was silent. I really didn't want to search for it at night. I hadn't gone in there after dark for a few years, and things had only gotten worse. It set something off inside me. A kind of spiritual Geiger counter is how I think of it. An intense primordial warning system that made the shadows around me look almost infinitely deep. More than that, I guess, it felt alien. It sounds stupid, but it really did feel like I wasn't on the same planet anymore. I don't know. That part might just be all in my head, but that's how I felt that night. I'd pushed myself just about as far as I was willing to go when I heard it. A rhythmic hollow knocking. It was coming from one of the largest pools in the park. A shallow, kid-friendly one we called the castle because it had a giant jungle gym in the center. A kind of spaghetti mess of platforms and climbing bars and slides that the kids loved. I followed the sound and saw a pile of rucksacks and even a large camera on the very edge of the pool. And there, just a couple of meters away, was a rowboat. The idiots had brought it with them. They probably thought they were being smart by avoiding the water below. At least, they tied it off so it was easy for me to pull back in. I gave it a cursory inspection, shivering at the mere thought of floating across that nightmare water in something so flimsy, and was ready to leave it until the morning, when I heard a quiet splashing. Something had climbed out of the water, and my heart dropped as I instinctively flicked the torchlight towards the sound of dripping water, and saw a thin, shivering shape climb onto the lowest steps of the castle. It looked gray and sickly, and then it started whimpering. I realized I was looking at a girl, college-aged, with stringy hair and an outfit that might have been colorful before she'd gone in the water, but now it was just the color of ash and moss. At a glance, she almost didn't look human anymore. She looked more like a starving animal, shell-shocked and shaking. I shouted out to her, but it was as if she couldn't hear me. She dragged herself onto a dry platform and curled up in a ball in the far corner, knees pulled to her chest and wide eyes locked in a 1,000-yard stare. And something was in that water. It came close to the surface, displacing small branches and causing the thick pond scum to bulge but never break. From the looks of things, it was circling the castle, and in some parts where the algae wasn't so thick, I got the faintest glimpse of colorless scales, the size of my hands, and a thick muscular trunk. Sometimes it seemed to bump up against the castle, like it knew the girl was nearby, but it didn't know how to get to her. The whole thing shook, and she'd whimper extra loud, but she still didn't show any signs of becoming lucid. I'd be lying if I said I didn't think about leaving her until morning. She was unresponsive and looked like she was just going to stay in the same place. Wouldn't it be better to just get her when the sun was up? I thought. But that was a pretty fucked up thing to think. She wasn't safe there. I wasn't safe just standing inside of the water, and she was on some old piece of plastic held together with rusting bolts. What if it collapsed? What if something came out of the water? God only knows it could happen. Something had touched my tent all those years ago. Who's to say I wouldn't walk on out to take her? At some point, I made the decision. I don't know exactly what did it, but I think it was the sound she was making. That, and the knowledge she'd been in there. God knows what she'd seen. I had to have sympathy. She needed help, and I was the only one around who could give it. So, once something deep inside me clicked, I knew I had to move quickly before the fear started to mess with my head. I grabbed the rope and began to pull the boat towards me. I wasn't sure what would happen. Half expected something to breach the water like a hungry shark and swallow the boat whole. But instead, whatever was circling the castle just slunk into the depths and stayed out of sight. Somehow, that was even worse, and I found myself scanning the water obsessively as I worked up the courage to get into the boat. I tried to keep the momentum though. I didn't let myself start thinking or doubting myself. I just climbed in awkwardly, 1 foot at a time, damn near shitting myself when the whole thing wobbled and I briefly felt like I was going to lose my balance. But I managed it, and soon I was sitting down and using the oars to pull myself through the water. As I rowed, my brain moved along in different directions. Part of me was almost watching myself, like from above, and asking over and over, "What the heck are you doing?" While another watched that water for the slightest sign of life. A third part of my brain was watching me for signs I was going to crumble from the adrenaline and ice-cold fear coursing through my veins. Each time the oars broke the water, I kept waiting to see something coming after me. And I was about halfway there when I realized that if it wasn't big enough, it could just bowl the whole boat over like a shark, knocking a surfer off his board. It was too far to turn back when I saw the water rise in the distance. Again, it didn't break the surface, but it came close and sent a couple of waves rolling across the entire pool, where they lapped against the distant edge. They made the whole boat rock side to side like it was just a bit of driftwood. When the bulge in the water appeared again, it was on the other side of the boat, and I made the terrible decision to stop rowing and look over the edge. There was no bottom to the pool, but whatever was down there wasn't swallowing continents anytime soon, at least. Hard to pin the size down, but based on the steely blue fins that slid by close beneath me, that didn't really matter. It could eat me easily enough, and that was all that mattered. Hell, I wasn't even sure if it was a fish or a squid or something else entirely, but I was pretty sure it still had a mouth somewhere in that murk. It gave the boat a gentle knock. Nothing serious, not enough to roll it, but enough to let me know it was interested in me. I decided I couldn't just stay there floating in one place forever. I had to move. I grabbed the oars and threw all caution to the wind. The sooner I got off that water, the better. Sure, I'd have to figure out how to get back, but that was a problem for later. Right there and then, all that mattered was the rising terror and disgust that took all my strength to keep from bubbling up into full-blown panic. As soon as the boat began to move, the creature slid out of view again. I didn't know if I ought to be relieved or even more afraid, but I took advantage of the lull in its activity to close the distance. and once close enough, I pulled the boat over to the same steps the girl had climbed. Once there, I secured it with a bit of the rope and hopped onto the first step, cringing at the way the ice-cold water felt slick and slimy against my ankles. The girl flinched at my touch, but she didn't scream or pull away. I told her it'd be okay, or something like that. I tried my best to sound reassuring. I tried to let her know I was going to get her somewhere safe. I managed to pull her to her feet when she finally turned and looked right past me. I barely existed to her at that moment. She only had eyes for the water behind me. Something about the look on her face gave me pause, though. She wasn't scanning for danger, she was looking right at something. And right before I had a chance to look for myself, she started screaming. When I saw it, I wanted to scream too. I'd never seen anything like it, or since. A head like seaweed, a face like a scallop. It watched us with an almost casual interest that frightened me more than any predatory scowl. The look of a child about to pull a spider's legs off. The thought of it still makes my skin crawl. It was so still, so alien, I couldn't help but pause and wonder if I was looking at something real or if it was just bad special effects. And yet, the moment stretched on until something in that unknowable mind made a decision and the creature disappeared back beneath the water. I made a decision too, and I dragged the young woman to the nearby boat, where she started to fight me the moment she saw it. Can't say I blame her. The last time she was on it, she'd nearly died, but there was no third option. It was stay and die or take our chances getting to safety. Unfortunately, we had barely gotten within a meter of the thing when the whole boat was blown sky high with tremendous force. I stood there dumbstruck, the girl crying and water falling from the sky like a momentary rainstorm. When the boat finally returned to Earth, it was a couple hundred meters away and hit dry land with a great crash. My stomach sank. How the heck were we going to get off the castle now? Not a moment later, and the entire structure began to shake. By now, the girl was close to hysterics, and I wasn't far behind. I took her hand and began to look for some high ground, as that thing began to shake and batter the flimsy plastic supports that held the platform up. We were forced to climb up towards the plastic roof of the tallest tower, which wasn't exactly all that high up, but it was the best we could do. The bars leading to it weren't easy to navigate, and at one point, I slipped and fell backwards, striking my chin painfully and looking up to see the girl going ahead without me. For a moment, I nearly gave up, but then there was the sound of something snapping, and the entire castle began to slide on one side. I looked down and saw black water rising up to meet me. The thought of sinking into that filth ignited something inside me, and I scrambled up the last few rungs and perched on top of the smooth plastic cover of the castle's highest turret. It was barely large enough for us both to sit on, but it was all we had. Looking back, I can't help but laugh. I make it sound like a great tower, but it was barely 12 feet off the ground. As soon as I was up there looking down, water quickly bubbling towards us, I realized just how badly we were screwed. We delayed our inevitable death by mere seconds at most. By the time the bright red piece of plastic we clung to hit the water, the castle had broken apart, so all its little pieces were floating in different directions. Ours was the last to go in, and it went down beneath our collective weight until the water reached our waists. Then it came back up, buoyant and hollow. It was no boat, but it came damn close. "Paddle," I cried at the girl, and she did, and we pulled ourselves through the water to the nearest edge. Pretty soon the makeshift raft bumped up against the tiled wall, and we were dragging ourselves up onto dry land where she rolled onto her back. I continued to crawl for another few meters until I felt like I was far enough away from the water. Only once I felt safe did I let myself collapse and lie crying and laughing for what felt like hours. But the girl only cried. At first a whimper, then a sob, and then a howl. A painful, gut-wrenching scream that made my own joy wilt until I could do nothing except listen to the raw grief in her voice. When I sat up to see if she was okay, she was sitting upright and staring at the thing that was rising out of the water. Again, no malice. Not really. At least I don't think so. It'd be like looking for a recognizable expression on an oyster. But it did watch us calmly as it ate what I can only assume was one of her friends. A man, I think. It's hard to remember details. He didn't cry, but he did look at us for help that we couldn't give. I'm not sure I could even tell you how it ate him, but it looked painful and slow. Reminiscent of a starfish, I think. At some point, the girl passed out, and not long after, so did I. I doubt she ever made a full recovery. The only thing she managed to say, even hours later after paramedics had sedated her, and I'd finished giving my less than truthful statement to police, were the words, "the stars," over and over. I think a lot about how changed I was when I first looked down into that water and saw the abyss below. But that poor girl was actually in it. She'd swum in those water, submerged. I don't even know how she came back from an ocean that doesn't have a surface, but she did. And somehow, I don't think she'll ever be the same. But it's got me thinking about myself, about what I've lost to it. Jeez, I'll be 40 before I know it, and what then? Just going to wait here forever and ever? There's a number on the back of my paychecks, and I want to try calling it to find out more. Like, what would they do if I tried going somewhere else? Would they let me? Because it's gone. The days of Ellen Ditzworth are gone. The days of a good back and strong legs are gone. The person I was before I saw that drifter die is gone. Yesterday is gone. The past is a shared hallucination. Only the present is real. I need to get out of here before I lose more of myself. I'm never going to understand this place. I realize that now. I can only accept that it exists and try to move on, which I should have done the day I saw those stars. Because there is an abyss, and it doesn't flow through time like we do. It doesn't occupy space like we do. But it's there and is full of gods the way a koi pond is full of fish, and I'm worried the more I think about it, the worse the part gets, and the closer I get to falling into waters that have no up or down and which never end. In my dreams, I am choking the acidic bile of a creature that swallowed me whole. I'm worried that if I stay here much longer, I'll forget how to wake up. I'm a long-haul trucker. I stopped for a lost kid on a deserted highway in the dead of night. What I saw attached to him, and the question he asked is why I don't drive anymore. This happened a few years back. I was doing long haul, mostly cross-country routes, the kind that take you through the vast stretches of nothing. You know, the ones where the radio turns to static for hours and the only sign of life is the occasional pair of headlights going the other way, miles apart. I was young, eager for the miles and the money, didn't mind the solitude, or so I thought. The route I was on took me across a long, desolate stretch of highway that ran between the borders of two large governmental territories. I don't want to say exactly where, but think big empty spaces, lots of trees and not much else. It was notorious among drivers for being a dead zone. No signal, no towns for 100 miles on either side, and prone to weird weather. Most guys try to hit it during daylight, but schedules are schedules. Mine had me crossing it deep into the night. I remember the feeling, utter blackness outside, the sweep of my headlights. The kind of dark that feels like it's pressing in on the cab. The only sounds were the drone of the diesel engine, the hiss of the air brakes now and then, and the rhythmic thrum of the tires on asphalt. Hypnotic. Too hypnotic. I'd been driving for about 10 hours with a short break a few states back. The coffee was wearing off. The dashboard lights were a dull green glow, comforting in a way, but also making the darkness outside seem even more absolute. My eyelids felt like they had lead weights attached. You fight it, you know? Slap your face, roll down the window for a blast of cold air, and crank up whatever music you can find that hasn't dissolved into static. I was doing all of that. It must have been around 2 or 3 a.m. I was in that weird state where you're not quite asleep but not fully awake either. Like your brain is running on low power mode. The white lines on the road were starting to blur together, stretching and warping. Standard fatigue stuff. I remember blinking hard, trying to refocus. That's when I saw it, or thought I saw it. Just a flicker at the edge of my headlights on the right shoulder of the road. Small, low to the ground. For a split second, I registered a shape, vaguely human-like, and then it was gone, swallowed by the darkness as I passed. My first thought, deer or a coyote? Common enough, but it hadn't moved like an animal. It had been upright. My brain, sluggish as it was, tried to process it. Too small for an adult, too still for an animal startled by a rig. Then the logical part, the part that was still trying to keep me safe on the road, chimed in. You're tired, seeing things. It happens. And I almost accepted that. I really did. I shook my head and took a swig of lukewarm water from the bottle beside me, kept my eyes glued to the road ahead. The image, though, kind of stuck. A small, upright shape, like a child. No way, I told myself. Out here? Middle of nowhere? Middle of the night? Impossible. Kids don't just wander around on international highways at 3 a.m. It had to be a trick of the light, a bush, or my eyes playing games. I've seen weirder things born of exhaustion. Shadows that dance, trees that look like figures. It's part of the job when you're pushing limits. I drove on for maybe another 30 seconds. The image fading, my rational mind starting to win. Just a figment. Then I glanced at my passenger side mirror. Habit, always checking. And my blood went cold. Not just cold, it felt like it turned to slush. There, illuminated faintly by the red glow of my trailer lights, receding into the distance, was the reflection of a small figure, standing on the shoulder of the road. Exactly where I thought I'd seen something. It wasn't a bush, it wasn't a shadow. It was small, and it was definitely standing there, unmoving, as my truck pulled further and further away. My heart started hammering against my ribs. This wasn't fatigue, this was real. There was something back there, and it looked tiny. Every instinct screamed at me, danger, wrong, keep going. But another voice, the one that makes us human, I suppose, whispered something else. A kid? Alone out here? What if they're hurt or lost? I fought with myself for a few seconds that stretched into eternity. The image in the mirror was getting smaller, fainter. If I didn't act now, they'd be lost to the darkness again. God, the thought of leaving a child out there, if that's what it was. Against my better judgment, against that primal urge to just floor it, I made a decision. I slowed the rig, the air brakes hissing like angry snakes, pulled over to the shoulder, the truck groaning in protest. I put on my hazards, their rhythmic flashing cutting into the oppressive blackness. Then I did what you're never supposed to do with a full trailer on a narrow shoulder. I started to reverse, slowly, carefully, my eyes flicking between the mirrors, trying to keep the trailer straight, trying to relocate that tiny figure. The crunch of gravel under the tires sounded unnaturally loud. It took a minute, maybe two, but it felt like an hour. The red glow of my taillights eventually washed over the spot again, and there it was, a kid. I stopped the truck so my cab was roughly alongside them, maybe 10 feet away. Switched on the high beams, hoping to get a better look, and also to make myself clearly visible as just a truck, not something else. The kid was small, really small. I'd guess maybe 6 or 7 years old. Hard to tell in the glare. They were just standing there on the very edge of the gravel shoulder, right where the trees began. The woods pressed in close on this stretch of road, tall dark pines, and dense undergrowth that looked like a solid black wall just beyond the reach of my lights. The kid wasn't looking at me. They were facing sort of parallel to the road, just walking, slowly, like they were on a stroll, completely oblivious to the massive 18-wheeler that had just pulled up beside them, engine rumbling, lights blazing. They were wearing what looked like pajamas, thin, light-colored pajamas. In the chill of the night, no coat, no shoes that I could see. My mind reeled. This was wrong. So many levels of wrong. I killed the engine. The sudden silence was almost deafening, amplifying the crickets and the rustle of leaves in the woods from a breeze I couldn't feel in the cab. My heart was still thumping, a weird mix of fear and adrenaline and a dawning sense of responsibility. I rolled down the window. The night air hit me, cold and damp, carrying the scent of pine and wet earth. "Hey," I called out. My voice sounded hoarse, too loud on the quiet. "Hey, kid." No response. They just kept walking, one small bare foot in front of the other, at a pace that was taking them absolutely nowhere fast. Their head was down slightly. I couldn't see their face properly. "Kid, are you okay?" I tried again, louder this time. Slowly, so slowly, the kid stopped. They didn't turn their head fully, just sort of angled it a fraction, enough that I could see a pale sliver of cheek in the spill of my headlights. Still not looking at me. Still ignoring the multi-ton machine idling beside them. A prickle of unease ran down my spine. Not the normal kind of unease. This was deeper, colder. Animals act weird sometimes, but kids... A lost kid should be scared, relieved, or something. This one was nothing. What are you doing out here all alone? I asked, trying to keep my voice calm and friendly, like you're supposed to with a scared kid. Even though this one didn't seem scared at all. It's the middle of the night. Silence. Just the sound of their bare feet scuffing softly on the gravel as they took another step, then another, as if my presence was a minor inconvenience, a background noise they were choosing to ignore. This wasn't right. My internal alarm bells were clanging louder now. My hand hovered near the gear stick. Part of me wanted to slam it into drive and get the hell out of there, but the image of this tiny child, alone, possibly in shock, I couldn't just leave, could I? Where are your parents? I pushed, my voice a bit sharper than I intended. Are you lost? Finally, the kids stopped walking completely. They turned their head just a little more, still not looking directly at my cab, more towards the front of my truck, into the glare of the headlights. I could see their face a bit better now. Pale, featureless in the harsh light, like a porcelain doll. Small, dark smudges that might have been eyes. No expression. None. Not fear, not sadness, not relief. Just blank. An unreadable slate. Then a voice, small, thin, like the rustle of dry leaves. Lost. Just that one word. It hung in the air between us. Relief washed over me, quickly followed by a fresh wave of concern. Okay, lost. That's something I can deal with. Okay, kid. Lost is okay. We can fix lost. Where do you live? Where were you going? The kid finally slowly turned their head fully towards my cab. Towards me. I still couldn't make out much detail on their face. The angle, the light. Something was obscuring it. Keeping it in a sort of shadowy vagueness despite the headlights. But I could feel their gaze. It wasn't like a normal kid's look. There was a weight to it, an intensity that was deeply unsettling for such a small form. Home, the kid said, in that same thin, reedy voice. Trying to get home. Right, home. Where is home? I asked, leaning forward a bit, trying to project reassurance. Is it near here? Did you wander off from a campsite? A car? There were no campsites for miles. No broken down cars on the shoulder. I knew that. The kid didn't answer that question directly. Instead, took a small step towards the truck. Then another. My hand tensed on the door handle, ready to open it. To offer what? A ride? Shelter? I didn't know. It's cold out here, I said, stating the obvious. You should get in. We can get you warm, and I can call for help when we get to a spot with signal. My CB was useless, just static. My phone had shown no service for the last hour. The kid stopped about 5 feet from my passenger door, still in that pale, thin pajama-like outfit, barefoot on the sharp gravel. They should be shivering, crying. They were doing neither. Can you help me? The kid asked. The voice was still small, but there was a different inflection to it now. Less flat. A hint of something else. Pleading, maybe. Yeah, of course I can help you, I said. That's why I stopped. Where are your parents? How did you get here? The kid tilted their head. A jerky, unnatural little movement. They're waiting at home. Okay, and where's home? Which direction? I gestured vaguely up and down the empty highway. The kid didn't point down the road. They made a small, subtle gesture with their head, a little nod towards the trees. Towards the impenetrable darkness of the woods lining the highway. In there, the kid said. My stomach clenched. In the woods? Your home is in the woods? Lost, the kid repeated, as if that explained everything. Trying to find the path. It's dark. Yeah, it's very dark, I agreed, my eyes scanning the tree line. It looked like a solid wall of black. No sign of any path, any habitation. Just dense, old-growth forest. The kind of place you could get lost in for days, even in daylight. Can you come out? The kid asked. Help me look. It's not far. I can't see from here. Every rational thought in my head screams no. Get out of the truck, in the middle of nowhere, in the pitch dark with this strange child who wanted me to go in those woods. No, absolutely not. But the kid looked so small, so vulnerable. If there was even a tiny chance they were telling the truth, that their house was just a little way in, and they were genuinely lost. I don't think that's a good idea, buddy, I said, trying to sound gentle. It's dangerous in there at night for both of us. The best thing is for you to hop in here with me. We'll drive until we get a signal, and then we'll call the police or the rangers. They can help find your home properly. The kid just stood there. That blank, unreadable face was fixed on me, but it's right there, they insisted. Their voice a little more insistent now. Just a little way. I can almost see it. If you just step out, the light from your door would help. My skin was crawling. There was something profoundly wrong with this scenario. The way they were trying to coax me out. The lack of normal emotional response. The pajamas, the bare feet, the woods. I looked closer at the kid, trying to pierce that strange vagueness around their features. My headlights were bright, but it was like they absorbed the light, rather than reflected it. Their eyes, I still couldn't really see their eyes. Just dark hollows. I really think you should get in the truck, I said. My voice firmer now. It's warmer in here. We can figure it out together. The kid took another step closer. They were almost at my running board now. Please, they said. That reedy voice again. My leg hurts. I can't walk much further. If you could just help a little, just to the path. My internal conflict was raging. My trucker instincts, owned by years of seeing weird stuff and hearing weirder stories at truck stops, were blaring warnings. But the human part, the part that saw a child in distress, was still there, still arguing. I was tired. So damn tired. Maybe I wasn't thinking straight. Maybe this was all some bizarre misunderstanding. I squinted, trying to see past the kid, towards the tree line they indicated. Was there a faint trail I was missing? A flicker of light deep in the woods? No, nothing. Just blackness. Solid, unyielding blackness. And then I saw it. It wasn't something I saw clearly at first. It was more like an anomaly. A disturbance in the darkness behind the kid. The kid was standing with her back mostly to the woods, facing my truck. Behind them, the darkness of the forest was absolute. Or it should have been, but there was something connected to them. Something that stretched from the small of their back, from under the thin pajama top, and disappeared into the deeper shadows of the trees. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, a weird shadow cast by my headlights hitting them at an odd angle. Maybe a rope they were dragging, a piece of clothing snagged on a branch. I leaned forward, trying to get a clearer view. The kid was still talking, their voice a low, persistent murmur. It's not far. Please, just help me. I'm so cold. But I wasn't really listening to the words anymore. I was focused on that thing behind them. It wasn't a rope. It wasn't a shadow. It was a tube. A long, dark, thick tube. It seemed to emerge directly from the kid's lower back, and possibly seamlessly. It was dark matte, like a strip of the night itself given form. And it snaked away from the child, maybe 10 or 15 feet, before disappearing into the inky blackness between the two thick pine trunks. It wasn't rigid. It seemed to have a slight, almost imperceptible flexibility, like a massive, sluggish umbilical cord made of shadow. It didn't reflect any light from my headlamps. It just absorbed it. My breath hitched in my throat. My blood, which had been cold before, now felt like it had been frozen solid. This wasn't just wrong, this was impossible, unnatural. The kid was still trying to coax me. Are you going to help me? It's just there. You're so close. My voice, when I finally found it, was barely a whisper. I couldn't take my eyes off that appendage. Kid, what? What is that? Behind you. The kid flinched. Not a big movement, just a tiny, almost imperceptible tightening of their small frame. Their head, which had been tilted pleadingly, straightened. The blankness on their face seemed to solidify. What's that? They asked, their voice suddenly devoid of that pleading tone. It was flat again, colder. That thing, I stammered, pointing up with a shaking finger, coming out of your back, going into the woods. What is that? The kid didn't turn to look. They didn't need to. Their gaze, those dark unseen eyes, poured into me. It's nothing, they said. The voice was still small, but it had a new edge to it. A hardness. You're seeing things. You're just tired. They were using my own earlier rationalization against me. No, I said, my voice getting a tremor of conviction, born of sheer terror. No, I'm not. I see it. It's right there. It's connected to you. The kid was silent for a long moment. The only sound was the thumping of my own heart, so loud I was sure they could hear it. The crickets had stopped. The wind seemed to die down. An unnatural stillness fell over the scene. Then the kid's face began to change. It wasn't a dramatic movie monster transformation. It was far more subtle and far more terrifying. The blankness didn't leave, but it sharpened. The pale skin seemed to tighten over the bones. The areas where the eyes were, those dark smudges, seemed to deepen, to become more shadowed, more intense. And a flicker of something ancient, utterly alien passed across their features. It wasn't human anger, it was something older, colder, and infinitely more patient, now strained to its limit. The air in my cab suddenly felt thick, heavy, and hard to breathe. "Just come out of the truck," the kid said. And the voice, it wasn't small. It was deeper, resonant, with a strange grating undertone, like stones grinding together. It was coming from that small frame, but it was impossibly large, impossibly old. It vibrated in my chest. "Come out, now." The command was absolute. My hand, which had been hovering near the gear stick, now gripped it like a lifeline. My other hand fumbled for the ignition key, which I'd stupidly left in. "What are you?" I choked out, staring at the monstrous thing playing dress-up in a child's form, at the dark, pulsating tube that was its anchor to the shadows. The kid's head tilted again, that jerky, unnatural movement. The expression on his face, if you could call it that, was one of pure, unadulterated annoyance. Contempt. Like I was particularly stupid insect it had failed to swat. And then it spoke, in that same terrible, resonant, grinding voice. The words it said are burned into my memory, colder than any winter night. "Why?" it rasped, the sound seeming to scrape the inside of my skull. "Are humans smarter now?" That was it. That one sentence. The sheer cosmic frustration in it. The implication of past encounters, of easier prey. The utter alien nature of it. I didn't think. I didn't plan. I reacted. Primal fear, the kind that bypasses all higher brain function, took over. My hand twisted the key. The diesel engine roared back to life. A sudden, violent explosion of sound in the horrifying stillness. The kid, the thing, actually recoiled. A small, jerky step back. The expression, that awful, tightened, ancient look intensified. I slammed the gear stick into drive. My foot stomped on the accelerator. The truck lurched forward, tires spinning on the gravel for a terrifying second before they bit into the asphalt. I didn't look at it. I couldn't. I stared straight ahead, my knuckles white on the steering wheel, the whole cab vibrating around me. The truck surged forward, gaining speed with agonizing slowness. For a horrible moment, I imagined that tube thing whipping out, trying to snag the trailer, to pull me back, to drag me into those woods. I imagined that small figure with its ancient, terrible voice, somehow keeping pace. I risked a glance in my driver's side mirror. It was standing there, on the shoulder, unmoving. The headlights of my departing truck cast its small silhouette into sharp relief, and behind it, the dark tube was still visible, a thick, obscene cord snaking back into the endless night of the forest. It didn't seem to be retracting or moving. It just was. The thing didn't pursue. It just stood and watched me go. And that, somehow, was almost worse. The sheer confidence, the patience, like it knew there would be others, or maybe it was just annoyed that this particular attempt had failed. I drove. I don't know for how long. I just drove. My foot was welded to the floor. The engine screamed. I watched the speedometer needle climb far, past any legal or safe limit for a rig that size on a road that dark. I didn't care. The image of that thing, the child shape with its dark umbilical to the woods, and that voice, that awful grinding voice asking its horrifying question, was burned onto the inside of my eyelids. I must have driven for an hour, maybe more, at speeds that should have gotten me killed or arrested, before the adrenaline started to fade, replaced by a bone-deep shaking exhaustion that was more profound than any fatigue I'd ever known. My hands were trembling so violently I could barely keep the wheel straight. Tears were streaming down my face, not from sadness, but from sheer, unadulterated terror and relief. When the first hint of dawn started to gray the eastern sky and my phone finally beeped, indicating a single bar of service, I pulled over at the first wide spot I could find. I practically fell out of the cab, vomiting onto the gravel until there was nothing left but dry heaves. I sat there on the cold ground, shaking for a long time, watching the sun come up, trying to convince myself that it had been a dream, a hallucination brought on by exhaustion. But I knew it wasn't. The detail of that tube, the voice, the question. You don't hallucinate something that specific, that coherent, that utterly alien. I never reported it. Who would I report it to? What would I say? Officer, I saw a little kid who was actually an ancient cosmic horror tethered to the woods by a nightmare umbilical cord. And it got mad because I didn't want to be its dinner. They'd have me locked up, breathalyzed me, drug tested me, and sent me for a psych eval. I finished that run on autopilot, dropped the load. I drove my rig back to the yard and I quit. I told them I was burned out and needed a break. They tried to convince me to stay, offering me different routes and more pay. I just couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that kid, that tube, and those woods. Every dark road felt like a trap. I found a local job, something that keeps me home at night. I don't drive in remote areas anymore if I can help it, especially not at night. I still have nightmares. Sometimes when I'm very tired, driving home late from somewhere, I'll see a flicker at the edge of my vision on the side of the road, and my heart will try to beat its way out of my chest. I don't know what that thing was. An alien? A demon? Something else? Something that doesn't fit into our neat little categories? All I know is that it's out there and it's patient, and it seems to have learned that its old tricks aren't as effective as they used to be. Why the hell are humans smarter now? That question haunts me. It implies they weren't always. It implies that once upon a time we were easier. That maybe people like me, tired and alone on dark roads, used to just step out of the cab when asked and were never seen again. So if you're ever driving along one of those long, lonely stretches of road, deep in the night, and you see something you can't explain, maybe just keep driving. Maybe being smarter now means knowing when not to stop, knowing when to ignore that little voice telling you to help, because what's asking for help might not be what it seems. Stay safe out there, and please stay on the well-lit roads.